good morning, everyone, and welcome to our class. Today, we're going to host the lecture of Get This on Introduction to Space Syntax. And so, once again, thank you for being with us. I think she is now in Cyprus, and I would like to introduce Ilaria Geddes, who is a special scientist at the Department of Architecture of the University of Cyprus. She is the research coordinator of the Erasmus Plus project, CEBAL, that's how you pronounce it, Knowledge Alliance for Evidence-Based Urban Practices, and contributes to teaching courses on Mediterranean cities and research methodologies. That's what we're talking about today. She holds a BA in Classical Archaeology from King's College, 2 Master in Science in GIS and Spatial Analysis Archaeology from King's College in London. Sorry, so 2 Master in Science in GIS and Housing from University College in London, and PhD in Architecture from University of Cyprus. He has been working in the private, non-profit, and academic sectors, and was honorary research assistant at UCL 2005 to 2010. At University of Cyprus, she has been working as a postdoctoral researcher developing the evidence base to inform local planning policies and strategies to address sprawl in Cyprus. Well, I'm going to move on to the last part. She is also co-president of the Cyprus network of Woodland Morphology Signum, which she founded with others in 2016, and editorial advisor to the Journal of Cities and Health. Thank you very much for being with us. And we are live on YouTube. I'm going to share the link to that later on the chat. And we have a lot of people in the class and on Zoom. The floor is yours. I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now? You can, but now I cannot hear you.
Hello?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. You sound very far away, but we'll sort out that problem later, I guess. Okay, so let me share my screen. What I was saying is thank you very much for inviting me again to give this lecture. It's one of my favorite things to do, introducing people to space syntax. And so we're talking about the basics of space syntax, the theory, and the key concepts, really. There are many space syntax. I will focus on just a few of them here. The objectives of this lesson are to introduce the participants to space syntax theory and some principles, understanding the significance of space syntax, and understanding some basic space syntax terminology, which is very important when you hear more advanced lectures or research presentations about space syntax. It will enable you to understand what people are talking about. So let's start with an introduction. First of all, space syntax was developed in the 1970s by Bill Hillier, Julian Henson, and colleagues at University College London. Originally, it was developed to understand the failure of modernist council estates. So what they noticed in the UK, as well as in other contexts, was that social housing estates, particularly those built in the modernist style, were failing from a social point of view, meaning that they had a lot of social problems, they had a lot of environmental problems, what they ended up terming social malaise. So things like graffiti, rubbish lying around, higher rates of crime within the estate than in the urban areas on average. And more generally, it was developed to understand and simulate the social effects of design. The key publication was the Sociological Space in 1984. So it's been now almost 40 years of scholarship in the field. Things have developed a lot since then. Another second key publication was the Space is the Machine by Bill Hillier in 1996. And Space Syntax now runs a biannual symposium, which started in 1997. And actually, the next one in 2024 is going to be held here at the University of Cyprus in June next year. In 2010, the network also started the publication of a journal of space syntax. This, however, unfortunately, has stopped some years ago. There were plans to reinitiate it, but it seems they have stalled. And I don't have updates about that at the moment. I don't know if it will start again or not. It is a discipline that is now used by hundreds of universities as well as practices worldwide. And by practices, I mean urban design, mostly urban design consultancies, as well as architectural consultancies and planning, spatial planning consultancies. It has a variety of research applications. In fact, it is used well beyond urban design, planning, or architecture. It is used, for example, in archaeology, in neuroscience, to understand cognition, spatial cognition specifically, and various others. So the basics. First of all, what you need to remember is space syntax is both a theory and a method. So it's very, very grounded in theory, but it uses tools to empirically support the theory it develops. So it's basically what it does is that it quantitatively describes patterns of spatial layout and relates these patterns to social activities, such as movement, behavior, and even social meaning and interpretation. So when I say patterns of spatial layout, I mean simply a street network, a street system within an urban area or a city, or the layout of a building. It is based on two fundamental understandings of space, geometric understandings of space. The first one is the movement is a linear process. You move along a line, which geometrically translates in the build form as streets, usually. But of course, you also move along a line, even through a public space. During the process of movement, visual information changes from point to point, and I'm sure you're all aware of this as users of urban environments, that as you move through space, your viewpoint changes, different views open up, other views disappear, you get, let's say, to a junction, and you see a new street coming to your left and your right, and so on. The second understanding of space is that interaction and inhabitation require convex spaces. in which all points can see all others. So these are spaces where wherever you stand, if you look, if you had eyes behind your head, or let's say if you turned around yourself, you will at 360 degrees, you will be able to see all points within that space. That is actually the geometrical definition of a convex space. The network of spaces in a system, so it's the street network, the connections between every street in the system, the connection between every room in the building is called configuration. Configuration is a very important term in space syntax, and it means the relations between spaces taking into account other relations. So it's a set of relationships among parts, let's say urban streets for our purposes, all of which are interdependent in an overall structure of some kind. So the concept of configuration addresses the whole of a system rather than each individual part. By analyzing configuration mathematically, so by analyzing the relationships, it is possible to develop an understanding of space, which is independent of architectural type and style. And this is what a very important aspect of space syntax. What it does is it strips the analysis of architectural or urban environment of their expressive characteristics, of aesthetics, of other intentions of the materials, parts of the environment. So it literally focuses on space, what in urban environments we call the space between the buildings, and what in a building you might call the space between the walls. So let's get on to the theory. Space syntax proposed two things from the beginning. The first one is that space is not just a background to human activity, but is intrinsic to it. So it differs from, let's say, some urban sociological theories that view space as where human action and where human intentions are reflected. What space syntax claims is that we influence space, but space influences us. So there is a relationship between humans and space, which we cannot disconnect the one from the other. Space in first and foremost configurational. So what happens in an individual space, whether it is a room, a corridor, a street, or a public space, is not only related to the space itself, but is fundamentally influenced by the relationship between that space and the network of spaces to which it is connected. This is what space syntax does. It measures the relations of each space to all other spaces in the system. So what are the key relationships that have been found between the configuration of space and social outcomes? So I hope you can see my cursor, or maybe I will get the laser pointer. Okay. So this is a space syntax analysis. On the left, it describes the configuration of space, how spaces are related to each other. You don't need to understand this now. I will explain it in a bit. These relationships correlate with movement, pedestrian movement, but also vehicular movement, They correlate with the distribution of land uses in city, where residential buildings and where commercial buildings are located, for example. It correlates with economic indicators, so often with the price of land values, of real estate values. It also correlates with patterns of crime in urban areas. And more generally, it correlates with sustainability, and these links to movement. So the configuration of space often dictates how we decide to move within a city, and therefore whether we are more or less likely to walk and cycle rather than take the car. How does space influence movement? This is something I've already said, but I want to reiterate it. People move along lines. They interact in convex spaces, and they perceive changes in visual fields as they move. So let me introduce the concepts, the main concepts. Today I want to speak about the dual grid and the generic city. So this is about what we call the foreground and background street network in cities interrelate. I will explain this, no need to understand it now. The second is natural movement. So how urban space shapes movement flows, in particular pedestrian movement, but not only. And the concept of the movement economy, which is very much linked to natural movement, and it relates to how land uses exploit movement, how land uses take advantage of where people are in the urban system. So I'm essentially, if I briefly go back, focusing on these initial correlations between the city, the form of the city, generically speaking, movement, and the land use and the economy specifically. So the first principle, the generic city. Each city has a unique spatial signature. So cities are often highly recognizable by their urban form. So you can see Rome here, for example. You can see Riyadh, New York with Broadway clearly crossing the grid, New Delhi, and London. So according to the theory of the generic city, which is based on extensive study of hundreds of cities and settlements, both ancient and modern, around the world, what we get is two types of network. So this is a space syntax analysis. In red, you see the streets or street segments that are most accessible to people. In blue, you see the segments which are least accessible. So this analysis has been run on many cities all over the world. This is London, and for example, this is Beijing. I'm just giving a couple of examples here of two cities which are very different. And this is Tokyo. So the generic city is a theoretical proposition that there is a universal city with many spatial and functional invariants across cultures. That means that cities are ontological entities. They exist as such. There is such a thing as a city, and that is because cities have universal characteristics. what are these universal characteristics that we see in all cities? They are comprised of a very small number of long lines and a very large number of short lines. These constitute a dual system, which make up the foreground and background networks, and these have different geometries. The foreground network is the one that is made up of the longer lines, which have nearly straight connections. And it has a universal form that is found practically in all cities across the world. And it has the form of a deformed wheel with sort of a circle in the center and spikes coming out. The background network is made up of shorter lines with more near right angle connections. So the connections are much less straight. This background network is culturally idiosyncratic. So it is more localized and has less linear continuity. That means that the background network actually changes from city to city. It is very different in its shape and form. So the foreground network is what makes cities similar. The background network is what tends to make cities unique in spatial terms. So the background network is dictated by various other factors, like cultural factors, social factors, and so on. So I'll go back one to show you these ideas. So in red, basically, is what is the foreground network. These are the longer lines, so you tend to get these kind of wheel in the middle, and then spikes radiating out to the periphery of the city. And the areas in blue, in the lower accessibility values, are the more residential areas in the cities. And you can see these even in very greedy cities. So it might be more of a squarish wheel, but you still get these around the center and spikes coming out. And London as well. So you get the central wheel and spikes coming out. So let's move on to the second principle, that of natural movement. So movement is a linear process during which visual information changes from point to point. What is very important about space syntax is that the mapping, the modeling of cities performed by space syntax is intended to represent what can be seen and experienced by a human within a space. So I'm not going to get into any methodology today, but this is what the lines in the space syntax model that you have just seen represent. They represent how we view space as we move through it. Therefore, space syntax implicitly includes the relationship between humans and the physical form of cities. So what we also know is that evidence from cognitive science, as well as from the analysis of aggregated urban flow data, pedestrian flow data, shows that geometric and topological factors are involved in navigation, far more than metric properties. So that means that we tend to move following the geometry and the topology of space rather than distance. We might think we are trying to take the take the shortest route between two places, but generally we tend to move along the straightest routes. So here is how it works, basically. Let's say you want to go from A to B. We are not doing the exercise together because it's a short lecture, relatively short lecture today. So this has been studied by space syntax and by cognitive science as well, to see what is the route that most people take between these 2 points. So this is the shortest path. So the least, the metric distance between A and B. However, this is the simplest path. And what you will find is that most people actually take this path, even if it is longer. So people tend to prefer simple, more direct paths over complex, indirect paths, even if these are shorter. And this is because of the visual information that is afforded to us by the urban form of the city. Now, if you do this exercise, if you try and draw the route you might take between A to B, obviously it is a little bit skewed because you see the urban form here as the eagle flies. So you see from above. While in reality, in space, you don't have this comprehensive vision of the city from above. You're actually moving on the ground according to what you see around you. How does this work? So this is a typical example. It is known as a desired path, and you tend to see this very often across grass in parks which are designed, as well as in other places. Typically, when it snows in some cities, you might see this line on streets or caused by people crossing streets over the snow. So what's happening here is that most people wanting to get from this place to this place, instead of following the path constructed for them by designers, they cut across because it's much more direct. And the cumulative action of people, because practically almost everyone does it, creates a natural footpath along through the grass. This is an interesting experiment which was done at Michigan State University. Let me. So what they did here is they had a development on campus. They were building new buildings, and what they decided to do is instead of building the footpaths, designing the footpaths, they only placed the buildings and the roads. And they waited some time, and this is what happened, essentially. All these footpaths that you see here are created by people's feet moving along their desired lines. So these kind of footpaths you see very often across grass in American suburban campuses. What they decided to do here instead is to let people create their own footpaths. And I actually don't know what has happened since, whether they decided to pave these footpaths over. How does it work in practice, this theory for design purposes? So this is the famous Shibuya crossing in Tokyo. It is also known as it is also, sorry, this is the famous Shibuya crossing in Tokyo. It is also now known abroad as a Tokyo Junction or a crisscross junction or a scramble crossing. What this design does is it enables people to follow a desired line of movement across the street. And it also saves pedestrian time by avoiding having to cross the road twice at right angle, which normally entails waiting for cars to go through in between. So most standard crossings, as they've been designed in the past, you have to cross from one street to the opposite one, then wait for the next round of cars to go, and again onto the other side. In fact, this type of crossing also eases traffic congestion because of the reduced number of times that cars have to be stopped in order to let people cross twice instead of just one. So by tweaking the timing of the traffic lights, it reduces congestion. It lets cars go through for longer, and then it lets pedestrians go across wherever they want. I'll take this to the end. Okay, so to what extent does the configuration of space organize movement? How much are the relationships between spaces influential in shaping pedestrian and vehicular movement patterns? So there has been a lot of correlational research over the years telling us that movement flows relate to configuration measured as spatial accessibility. According to these various studies, about 60 to 80% of movement flows relate to the structure of the network, in the sense that more accessible places, as this accessibility increases, get more movement. Movement also increases. Obviously, an interesting question is what determines the remainder 20 to 40% of movement. This is a combination of factors which can be embedded into configurational space syntax analysis through multivariate statistical techniques. So this factor may include the location of transport nodes, surrounding residential density, the multiplier effect of land uses, the location of major landmarks, as well as design details, whether sidewalks are present, whether streets are pedestrianized, and so on, which impact the quality of the environment. But the great thing about this discovery is that spatial accessibility is a very, very good indicator and predictor of movement, which enables you to do very fast analysis of social outcomes in space, as well as of design proposals. So it enables you to predict the effects of design of movement before something is built. So this is true in urban areas, but it is also true within buildings. This is the Tate Gallery in London, and here is the visual integration pattern. The ranges are the same. We always tend to use from red for the most accessible, or integrated, to blue for the least integrated. And here is the movement flows of people visiting the gallery. So these are traces. People are followed and their movement is traced on the layout plan. It's not a correlational, it's not a statistical correlational analysis like the previous one that I have just shown. But even just visually, you can clearly see how the two variables match. So here we investigate patterns by observing and recording. So this is not just a kind of simulation model. Is based on a lot of empirical evidence, which goes back to, I wouldn't say ethnographic research, but it is to a great extent is observing how people, is observing and measuring how people move in space. So a fundamental factor, here is an old-fashioned picture of Fan 1 counting people crossing the Millennium Bridge in London. But of course, nowadays, this can also be done with other methods, people counters, laser beams for counting people, and so on. But it is based on actual data from real phenomena. I'm having some trouble switching from one slide to the next, which is why I'm slow. Okay. So once I want to highlight how important this key finding of space syntax is, the relationship between the configuration of space, spatial accessibility, and movement. I've already mentioned it enables us to make some predictions about the effects of an intervention. So here is something that Space Syntax Limited, which is a spin-off company of University College London, implementing the use of space syntax methodology in consultancy, in urban design consultancy, did for the Millennium Bridge project, which you have just seen in the previous slide. So there were questions about the location of the Millennium Bridge when it was going through planning application, and the designers went to the consultancy asking them to provide evidence on of how much the bridge will be used. One of the counter arguments was a pedestrian bridge in that location is not going to be used. So what they did is they measured the spatial accessibility of each existing bridge in central London, and they measured the pedestrian flows as well of each bridge in central London. They then modeled the Millennium Bridge on the space syntax model of the city. So they basically have the model of London. They added a line where the Millennium Bridge was. They reran the analysis. They extracted the accessibility value provided by the analysis. They plotted it, and there they could make a prediction here. So there are some, and these help the designers making an argument that the location of the bridge was the best option. So the principle of the movement economy. The movement economy is essentially based on the previous principle, the fact that the urban form shapes where we move. So he proposes that space organization in settlements, so the urban form of a city itself, generates the distribution pattern of busier and quieter movement. This, in turn, influences land use choices, which then again generates a multiplier effect on movement. So space syntax originally, and it still does, it asserts that it is essentially the urban form, and I believe in this. He has proven it, that shapes determines where people are. But over time, it has accepted also that once land uses are placed on these according to various levels of accessibility, then they create a reinforcing effect of movement. So in fact, as we saw, it's only 60 to 80% of movement that is shaped by the spatial pattern. So the relationships between spatial elements result from their configuration. These relationships can be objectively analyzed using various space syntax measures. The most important space syntax measures are integration and choice. These reflect two fundamental elements in human movement. The first one, integration, is the selection of a destination, and the second one, choice, is the selection of the route. So one measures the ease of access to one place, integration, and the other measures the passing flow. So here is how it works, and once upon a time we used to do this manually even. Now we have software that does this for us. So what the tool does, the space syntax as a method, takes a place in the system and measures how easy it is to get there or to get from there, to and from any other place in the system. And it does this for that space, this space, this space. In fact, the algorithm does it for every single space in the system, and it comes up with this model, which measures the areas that are most accessible, easiest to get to from all other places in the system. This kind of analysis, we tend to call it tool movement, how easy it is to get to places. This is an example of Chester, and it always reflects the commercial core of the city. The second measure, choice, that we refer to as through movement, what it does is it takes two places in the system and it identifies the most direct route between these two places. Then it does the same for two other places, and it identifies, it measures, counts the number of overlapping paths. And again, the algorithm does this for all places in the system, to all other places in the system, and produces again, a model which reflects a different type of accessibility, which we call through movement, how likely these spaces are to be used as a route from one place to the other. Through movement is a measure, through movement or choice, as we call it, is a measure that correlates best with a retail location in cities. You can see how the highest values correlate with retail categorized in red here. This is the same analysis. So you have retail locations in red and the choice analysis. I'm showing this again because there was an experiment checking whether shortest routes will correlate with the location of retail. And this is obviously not the case. So you can see the measure of shortest routes between all places to all other places in the system. And it has nothing, essentially nothing to do with the distribution of land uses in a city. So there are many scales of movement that we measure. So we can measure local movement, let's say at 2 kilometers radius, and this clearly picks up cities within a nation if you run this analysis at the whole country level. You can look at citywide movement, and obviously these increases, it starts highlighting the interconnection between cities. Or you can look, say, countrywide movements of 100 kilometers, and you can see that this picks up the main interconnections between the major cities in the UK, London, Birmingham, Manchester. What we have learned, the two fundamental measures of space syntax. If you get into space syntax, these are words you will hear a lot, and I will repeat and specify what they are. Integration is a measure of distance from any space of origin to all others in a system. In general, it calculates how many spaces are around the origin space and also how close the origin space is to all other spaces. In cities, spaces with high integration are where commercial centers are mostly found. To movement refers to the movement to a space as a destination from all others. So the measure of integration tends to predict to movement how likely people are to go to a specific place. Choice is calculated by counting the number of times each street segment falls on the shortest path between all pairs of segments within a selected distance. And this reflects what we call through movement potential. That is the movement passing through on shortest routes from all points to all other points in the layout. The shortest path, or the shortest path in inverted commas, or the shortest distance, we need to always remember that in space syntax does not refer to metric distance. It does not refer to shortest in metric terms. It refers to the most direct or the straightest route, those which have the least number of right angle turns. So the measure of choice tends to predict through movement, the passing flow of movement, and it correlates well with the distribution of active retail land uses. So this is it, basically. There are many correlations. There are many social outcomes that space syntax can shed light on. In particular, the most researched are movement and land use, which we have talked about today. The economy in terms of actual values of properties and land, crime, sustainability, but there are also many others. I repeat that people move along lines, interact in convex spaces, and perceive the changes in visual fields as they move. And these are the basic understandings of urban space on which space syntax is grounded. And that's it. I managed to leave 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Ilaria Guedes, for your lecture illustrating theory and methods of space syntax applied to different scales, territorial scale, we have seen England, city scale, we have seen Tokyo and others, but also the scale of the urban space, further more in scale of the building. Very flexible way of understanding spaces at different scales indeed. Again, Cristo Parapoli, but we can pick one or two questions from the audience, both in the classroom and on Zoom. If you wish, raise your hand, turn on your microphone and camera, and go ahead. We don't have a lot of people, so I'm sure it's going to be okay. If I might break the ice. So, but then, how do we do this? How do we do these colorful maps? Let's get this.
How do we do them? You need to invite me.
Question. Okay, how do we do this? I want to do that myself. How should I do it?
You need to invite me for a whole other lecture about methodology. I have it ready, but maybe another time. In very summary format. There are essentially two ways of doing these maps. The first one is to draw manually what we call an axial map. And by manually, in the old days, we used to do it on a piece of paper or on specialized software on a Mac computer. Nowadays, you can do it in geographic information systems on a base map like Google Maps or satellite. This type of drawing, what we do is we draw the longest line, the shortest number of longest line covering the whole network of open spaces in the system. So this is, we don't draw each street bit by bit, but we draw the full line, even if there is a bend in the street, even if the street changes, so long as you can see through. So these lines reflect visibility. In fact, we also call them lines of sight. So we can analyze this map, the axial map, or we can then segment it, meaning we can break this set of longest lines covering the whole system into smaller elements. So the lines get cut off whenever there is a junction or whenever there is a bend in the roads. This enables a bit more refined analysis, meaning that it tends to pick up changes in the urban environment at a finer scale. So you might find that along even a very straight, very long route, you will find differences between different sections of the street. And these more refined analysis, which we call segment analysis, tends to pick up finer differences. So this is one way, the old people like me way of doing things. Nowadays, you can also automate this process, and you can download a road center line from either official sources, something like your Department of Land and Surveys would have an official road center line, or from open sources like OpenStreetMap. There is a toolkit for the QGIS software developed by Space Syntax, which is free to download. And you need to learn the process of doing this, but basically you open your road center line in GIS, and by using the toolkit, you clean the road center line, because data, built environment data, are always a bit fussy. It's not exactly what we use in Space Syntax. It simplifies the map, and then you press the button and it runs the analysis so long as the model is working. But this is a very short way of putting it. It actually takes some time to learn it in practice. This is possibly the more common way of doing it nowadays, but it only allows you to run segment analysis, which for some measures like integration and choice is fine, but there are other, let's say, more specific measures of Space Syntax that reflect other properties of the environment. As I mentioned here, I'm just going through the basics, which can only be measured with an old-fashioned axial line. So it really depends which system you use, which method you use, really depends on your research question and what you want to find out.
Thank you. Now, we got two questions. One is from the classroom. You want to turn on your microphone?
Hello, Doctor. Hello, Doctor.
Hello? I can hear you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Doctor. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. I would like to ask about if I'm doing research about the piezoelectric tiles. If I want to install the piezoelectric tiles in the metro station, can I use the Space Syntax?
Very interesting. When you say the electric tiles, you mean the ones that produce energy by working on them?
Yes.
I haven't thought about it. We have a project here that we're planning to install some electric tiles on our linear park. Yeah, actually, I haven't seen it done. I think Space Syntax analysis would be extremely useful for this. I haven't heard about it being used this way yet, but it's an obvious, it's ingenious, actually. It's an obvious connection, yes, because by doing the analysis, you will be able to find the best locations to place the tiles to produce most energy. Although in this case, if it's a practical project, you can simply go and measure the number of people walking there and just place them where you find most people. But if you need to select a location and you're not able to measure the flows, then Space Syntax will be a very good replacement for actual measurements.
There is another question in chat, but Abir Al-Laham, you want to say it yourself? Are you able to do so?
Shall I read it?
Yes.
Veer.
Hello. Yeah. Yes. You mentioned, hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for the lecture. It's very illuminating. You mentioned in your lecture that cities are, in a way, universal in their basic features. Now, I came from a background from an Arab country where I looked, I'm an architect, so I look into the rationale of the end product, the physical urban tissue itself, where if you look, for example, into any city in Greece and any city in an Islamic country, you might see common features, physical features. But if you look deep into the imperceptible level, the deep level, deep structure, as in space syntax, they say it's totally different. So if I use these tools as integration, choice, axial maps, they lead to some kind of confusing results. If you look into, and for example, any map has values related to it, and those values are in a way reflected on how that space. And you feel that the map shows that this space is more positive than the other one in a way. It's more axial, it's more integrated, it's more there is more penetration. Whereas those values in other cultures are more preferable, as in Islamic cities. So how can we use these maps to interpret the urban tissue in different cultures? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's a very important question. It's very relevant where I am in Nicosia. This is why on the poster there was a space syntax analysis of Nicosia. Nicosia is a very famous case study because it shows the universal features of the city, the foreground network, the east, and it shows the unique features of the city that belong to different cultures. So the foreground network is different. The background network is different in different places, whether they were inhabited by Greek Orthodox or by Muslim Turkish Cypriots. So it's an example that you might be interested in looking at, but let me be very, very clear about this because there is a big misunderstanding in space syntax has been going on for a long time. Red does not mean good and blue does not mean bad. This is not, we are talking about levels of accessibility. It doesn't mean that the most accessible, the better. You want accessibility in specific places and you don't want accessibility in other places. It depends what your intentions are. And this is why the background network reflects the culture. There is nothing wrong with the culture, whichever it is. So it's not, even in Arabic cities, you still get those universal features, and these features are there because cities are needed. We build them to enable proximity between us, to enable socioeconomic exchanges. And these socioeconomic exchanges and cultural exchanges tend to happen in the foreground network. But when you move to the background network, then each culture, let's say, decides what is best for them. The fact that, say, perhaps a Western culture tend to have slightly more integrated values in the background network, and an Islamic culture has somewhat less integrated values in the background network, it's fine. This is what cities are. It doesn't have a connotation of the value being better or worse. You don't want high accessibility in residential areas in any case, anywhere. You do want residential areas to be in quieter places.
Thank you. There's another question from the chat, but before we come to that, I want to show you the integration analysis of Diyarbakir, which seems to be an Islamic city, as far as I know. With a typical dead-end pattern, but again, we have the same configuration as for the foreground, the wheel. the foreign wheel. And then the background is quite different because it's made of a set of dead ends, making them very, not very much integrated. But the point is, you can take any city in the world and make your axial map of it, and then do the integration analysis on that and see what comes out, and probably say that that city is different from the other ones, of course. Zeruati from the chat, you want to speak up yourself? If not, I can read that. Hi, everyone. If we want to explore the sense of safety and the location of crimes in the street network, what measures can be correlated to this?
Okay, I used to do a lot of work in crime. It's been a while. If you want the specific measures, you need to go back to the literature. It's fairly easy to find, but it really depends on what type of crime you're measuring. Because crime is, okay, if you are measuring, you don't measure spatially, let's say, financial corruption. This is not something that has a spatial form as far as I know. What we call opportunistic crime has a spatial patterning, whether it is pickpocketing or burglary in houses. They, depending on the levels, the gravity, let's say, of the crime, they tend to pattern across the range of scales. So things like pickpocketing tends to take advantage of movement and high movement flows, high presence of people. So it's difficult to pickpocket someone where there are no people. More serious crimes from, let's say, burglaries as well, but even, let's say, even more serious things like sexual assault tend to happen in much more segregated areas because the criminal needs to ensure that they are not seen. The risk of punishment is much greater. So it tends to measure, I would suspect if more research had been done since I was working on it, pickpocketing will correlate with high levels of choice, and the more serious crime with low levels of integration. But yeah, you need to look into the literature to find the exact measures that you need to use.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're done for today. Therefore,